Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, wonderful to welcome back to the radio. Ralph McAlister, good morning to you, sir. How are you?
And from my wireless, good morning to you, radio person.
Radio person. Lovely. Yes, when I was growing up, I was always fascinated. Apparently, when I was only just crawling, I was found behind the radio trying to find the person talking on the radio. However, here we are, and we have not one, but I understand 2 books today.
Yes, before that, though, I must tell you, I was in the supermarket the other day, and this woman, middle-aged woman, came up to me and said, "I know your voice, I know you, you're Ralph." And she was so sweet.
Oh, that's lovely.
And that was nice, So some people do listen to us, I suppose.
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
It's always nice to hear, isn't it?
It is, strangely enough. I just hate the look of disappointment on their faces when they see what I look like. However, I'm sure that doesn't apply to you, sir.
No, you're being diplomatic, and you know that's not true, all right? The Overstory, one word, by Richard Powers, Powers, won the Pulitzer Prize last year, 2019. It's all about trees and the importance of trees. It's a novel. It's extraordinary in terms of what it tries to achieve. It takes 5 or 6 people through the years and how trees start to control each of them in their own way. Oh. And they're strangers at the beginning of the novel, but then as the stories go on, they become more and more deeply penetrating into what trees are and what benefits they are to society. Now, I must point out right away that I can think of a couple of my friends who will like this very much. I had great difficulty, John, because it's 600 pages long.
Oh, yes.
It's stunningly written, but it's also stunningly unedited. It's far too long. Oh. It's crammed with information about trees. So if you are in any way a member of DOC or anybody on conservation, you probably will want to read this. And I'm not trying to be negative, but I finally, and I'm very unusual for me, I didn't finish it. I just couldn't. I couldn't take the constant barraging of facts about trees and what they do, apart from going into the magic influences of some of the people in the book, in the stories. It just didn't sustain me. Wow. So having said that, Pulitzer Prize, 2019, excellently reviewed, but for me, I just faded in my interest. The Overstory, Richard Powers, and I'd like to be told what I'm missing, but I think I've been tenuous enough. I got to about page 400, and I thought, I don't need to read any more of this. So there's one of them. Okay.
Okay. Just before we move on to the next one, though, the people, I assume, are fictional.
Yes, it's a novel.
So you've got lots of these botanical facts. So it's sort of botanical fiction in a way, then.
Well, some of them are based on real people. I don't know who they are, but I know that, and that helps a bit. There are actually quite violent endings to some of their lives, and that's quite exciting because you suddenly realize it is a novel and it's going somewhere, but it, as a whole, it's just too much. That's all. And when it's an Overstory, I just keep wanting to say it should be subtitled Overwritten. You know,
okay.
That's it. So, sorry, I can't be a bit more positive. But the other one is Tom Kineally's latest.
Oh.
If you know anything about Tom Kineally,
he's
one of the old men of literature of the Australian heritage. He's a wonderful writer. I remember going to a talk that he gave in Wellington at one of the book festivals about 4 or 5 years ago. And he's a cuddly grandfather, and he's so keen on his grandchildren. And he was just a breath of humanity, and I love his work. And so I got to the latest one, which only has just come out. It's called The Dickens Boy, as in Charles Dickens.
Oh, yes.
And it's by Kineally. And he's taken, as he does so often, he's in the late 1800s, and the story begins with the 10. Charles Dickens really did have 10 children, the youngest of whom truly was sent to Australia to man up, or whatever the phrase was at the time, to apply himself, because he wasn't very bright. And so he's sent to Australia at the age, with his brother, to meet him at the age of 16.
Goodness me.
He gets to Australia in Melbourne. He has one terrible secret, which is that he's never read any books by his father.
My goodness.
And he's only 16, so that's understandable. But he keeps meeting all these famous people, and he's totally embarrassed because they all know about Little Nell and all about David Copperfield and, our mutual friend. And of course, dear old Plawn, as he's nicknamed by his father, he doesn't know anything about the book. So that's on the one side. And then on the other side, he begins to learn the wonderful classlessness of Australian society. And he's sent out to a 2,000 square mile station in New South Wales to become a man. And that's the story. It's told from his perspective. So where am I going with this? I'm going not very far, because it's got two stories in one. He's given us manuscript to be read by him at 16 because he's his father's son. And of course, he's not a reader, but he gets plunged into the story and he begins to see parallels with his own life and his own innocence. And the story within a story, whether it's true or not, it is based on fact, but it becomes a double-edged account. He gets impressed by this manuscript and he starts learning from it. He's also, and this is the positive thing about the book for your listeners, Kineally is brilliant at depicting the Australian landscape. And so you get these wonderful set scenes about cricket with 18 aside and people playing, going over sheep droving and stops and stations and frontiers and so on, and meeting with women for the first time, as Plawn does. So it's an education. It works on a certain level for me, but it's not. I don't want to say this, but I don't think it's one of Kineally's best. But it's certainly worth reading if you are remotely interested in Australian outback, which, of course, as I say, he's wonderful at depicting. And also, he is a master craftsman. It's just, I didn't get too much. I felt for the boy. I liked how he was so unintelligent and puts himself down. So you've got that sort of support there. But I think, I want to say go back to Daughters of Mars or some of his others. He's written about 25 books, by the way.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he's got a huge repertoire. Schindler's Ark is the other one I was thinking of. So it's called The Dickens Boy. It's not 5 stars for me. It's about 3. But then the Overstory, which I talked about before, is probably 2 or even a 1. So, sorry.
There we are. Oh, yes. So that's the verdict today from Ralph McAlister. Very interesting. I'm highly intrigued with the concept of the Dickens boy. I'd never heard of him. Do we know what happened to him eventually? I mean, the real Dickens boy.
Yeah. He went on and he loved the whole business about being in Australia, and he adjusted to it so well. And how long he lived, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to check on that again. But that doesn't, come into the book very much. But it's familiar territory. And I'd forgotten that Dickens had 10 children. And of course, that was quite normal in Victorian society because so many of them were procreation, but also a lot of them died. But he didn't. He went on And he had a wonderful life. So.
Well, that's the main thing. That's what we're looking for a happy ending. Wonderful. Ralph McAlister, it's been a pleasure once again. Thank you so much for gracing us here on Beach FM. Thank you.
You're very welcome, John.
106.3 Beach FM.